Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong's final week in review for 2025. Theoretically, this would be for December 28th. Today is December 30th, still for me for another couple of hours, and it's December 31st for my colleagues here in the show, Hovik and Benyamin. We're talking to Benyamin Poghosyan, who, of course, is from APRI Armenia, a think tank based in Yerevan. Hello, Benyamin, and welcome to the Groong podcast, and thank you for a year of insightful analysis.
Hello, Asbed, and hello, Hovik. It's always a pleasure to be with you. Especially, I think this is becoming like a tradition to meet on December 31 Armenia time and late December 30 US time and
Yes, indeed.
try to look after what happened in the year and try to understand or predict or at least analyze what may happen in the next year.
Yeah. This is the third year.
Fortune Benjamin Can.
Blockchain.
And this is also a special episode because this is episode 500 of our podcast.
Wow, congratulations. It's
we
really
started
milestone.
5 years ago, 5.5 years ago, and we're still going strong. Some stats that I would like to call out from YouTube, for instance, we have 13,000 subscribers. We have reached that mark. We have more than 850,000 views. I mean, it's not that much, but I think it's for an Armenian theme, for something that we specialize in. That's I think a number that we should behold. And lastly, across all the podcast networks, whether that's Spotify and so forth, Apple Podcasts, we have almost reached the 100,000 download mark. So 95,000 downloads across Spotify, Apple Podcasts. So this year we're gonna break some new records in terms of views, like 1 million views and 100,000 downloads. So we're looking forward to that.
Hovik and I
And I
have
want to
actually promised ourselves that we will, in 2026, we are actually going to make use of a little bit of the funds that have accumulated thanks to our listeners who have been contributing. We haven't taken a single penny so far, but we are actually going to take a little bit of that and use it for various priorities. There are so many
Yes.
little things. I mean, we get bombarded by SEO people saying that, just a little bit of SEO tuning and you could get another 10,000 views and stuff. Let's see what we can do.
Yeah, I think it's a really milestone, especially for like geopolitical podcast. I think 800,000 views is not bad for geopolitical podcast and mostly focused on Armenia, which definitely not is a hotspot for the world.
Mhm.
Maybe if this was an entertainment podcast, I would say no, like 800,000 is not big enough. But for geopolitical or geoeconomical podcast focused on Armenia, on Armenian issues, I think it's quite impressive milestone. And let's not forget that this is English language because mainly in Armenia still they mostly consume Armenian language content.
Absolutely
So
right.
Yeah.
your consumers or target audience is like I would say like small layer of Armenians in Armenia who consume geopolitics in English, but mostly it's like diaspora and it's also foreign diplomatic and expert circles. And I would say that when I'm meeting with many diplomats in Armenia, usually they said, "Oh yes, we are following Groong. Like we watched your episode or other episode in Groong, and this expert said this. So what do you think about that?" So I can say that at least for diplomatic circles in Armenia, people are following you, people know you.
Just imagine what it would be like if we had Kim Kardashian and talking Armenian.
Yeah, I think it will be probably like 10 million views per episode
in a day.
in a day.
Let's jump straight into the news. So this is going to be a year-end podcast, and many of our topics are going to be from the frame of reviewing what happened during the year, and also discussing what happened last week and where we're going to go in 2026. To begin with, let's circle around Armenia a little bit. We want to cover foreign crises affecting Armenia and the region. Namely, Ukraine is a major crisis that concerns us. If you remember, you can go back and watch our episode 403. So that was exactly about a year ago, where three of us were discussing the developments in 2024 and our predictions for 2025. Benjamin, you talked about the Ukraine war remaining one of the crises that will affect Armenia, and I think that we have, you have proven to be correct. So what happened last week in terms of the Ukraine war in Florida? US, Ukrainian, and Russian negotiators, not all at the same time, I think more in bilateral format, were are close or were close to agreeing to a US proposal for a peace treaty, or at least that's how the US officials were presenting it. Possibly, what was surprising to me was that I heard Zelensky talk about even a referendum to trade land in Donbass for permanent peace. So, amidst all this possibility, it was quite surprising that Russia reported that President Putin's residence in Novgorod was attacked, I think last night or a day ago. And it was a major attack by Ukraine involving almost like 100 drones. And if this is confirmed, this would be a major blow to the fragile negotiations. And Russian authorities have promised to respond in kind. So amidst these developments, Benjamin, what's your assessment of the current state of the peace negotiations in Ukraine to stop the war, and anything else you can comment in terms of this war?
Thank you, Hovik. I think what we have in Ukraine now, we have a Ukrainian version of peace, which from Russian perspective equals to Russia's capitulation and absolutely is not acceptable. And we have Russia's version of peace, which from Ukraine and leading European countries' perspective is a capitulation of Ukraine and some kind of capitulation of Europe, and it's not absolutely is absolutely unacceptable. So from this perspective, I don't think that all these negotiations, talks, and this hype which we see also from President Trump will bring any tangible result as far as either Ukraine or Russia does not think that they should capitulate or they should accept the conditions which are either capitulation or close to capitulation. So, from Russia's perspective, Russia thinks that, okay, guys, I have upper hand in the last 18 months at least, starting from mid 2024. So, no talks about capitulation. Like, I would be crazy to accept conditions which I believe it's capitulation. And from the Ukrainian and European perspective, despite Ukraine is losing territory, losing people, losing demography, losing economy, but still Ukraine has not reached the break point, so to capitulate. That's it. So I'm afraid the war will continue. My understanding is that the US is interested to have some sort of normal relations with Russia. The US understands that it cannot reach this normalization without war ends in Ukraine, and somehow US is inclined to accept the version which will more or less equals to a capitulation for Ukraine. But the problem for Russia and for the US and for the Ukraine is that apparently US has not enough leverage to force both Ukraine and the big European countries, I mean Germany, France, mostly and others, to accept this version of peace. So, for example, what we saw that originally Russia and US agreed on some peace plan, 28 points, which more or less, from European and Ukrainian perspective, was equal to capitulation. And it seemed that this was okay for the United States. But then Europeans jumped in, then changed the plan. Now we have 20-point peace plan. And from Russia's perspective, all important things for Russia have been taken away from this peace plan. So it's clear that this 20-point peace plan is not acceptable for Russia. So I'm afraid as far as Ukraine and Europe believe that they are not in a place to capitulate or to de facto capitulate, the war will continue. And from Russian perspective, their version is very clear. Either the war continues or you accept our conditions. So from Russian perspective, they believe that, okay, Ukraine rejected our offer in December 2025, no problem. We will fight for another 1 year, and in December 2026, Ukraine will be forced to accept a much worse offer from Russia. And if Ukraine and Europe rejecting offer in December 2026, then we will continue to fight for another year, and maybe in December 2027, Ukraine and Europe will be forced to accept a much worse deal. This is from Russian perspective. So I'm afraid I don't think that there is a high probability that war will stop in 2026. We just saw that the European Union agreed to put 90 billion euros of loan for Ukraine for the next 2 years. Of course, it's absolutely not enough for reconstruct Ukraine or whatever, but still it's enough to continue the war. So Europe is ready to pay. United States from one point is happy to get European money because now US spending $0 on Ukraine. It just take European money, Europe pays to US, and then weapons go to the Ukraine. That's it.
Benjamin,
Yeah.
okay, so there's money to continue the war, but is there manpower to continue the war?
I think at least for 1 year or 1.5 years, still there is a manpower. Yes, we believe, or there are estimates that in the territory controlled by Ukrainian government, now population is no more than 23, 24 million people. But still, we are speaking about 23, 24 million people. So even if we believe what President Trump is telling is true, that approximately every week, like few thousand Ukrainians are being killed, which means probably like 15,000 or 20,000 killed Ukrainians per month, which means like 250,000 Ukrainians killed per year. And let's assume the same is for Russia. So 250,000 killed person, and let's assume up to 600, 700,000 wounded. 1 year, it will be approximately 800,000. We speak about the population of 23, 24 million. Of course, not all are male, but still, I think Ukraine and also Russia, and Russia's population is at least currently like 6 times bigger than the population of current Ukraine. I believe both Russia and Ukraine can sustain this level of casualties for at least another 2 years.
I'm horrified by those numbers. I just want to say, we throw these numbers around 500,000, 250,000. I mean, just imagine the catastrophe that is 250,000 of your men dying every year.
Yeah, it's a
Right.
really disaster, but like I mean, from a strategic decision maker's point of view, I think again, I believe Ukraine can sustain at least 1 or maybe 2 years of fighting, and Russia can sustain more because simply Russia's population is around 140 million, I believe, and Ukrainian population under government control is at least 24, 25 million.
Benjamin, you mentioned various degrees of Russian offers that each one would be worse than every consecutive year. But what is the current Russian sort of red lines and negotiating positions? Because there's always this question about I think in terms of NATO expansion, there's still ambiguity between how Ukrainians see it and how Russians see it. For instance, Ukraine is willing to agree to a 15-year pause in NATO expansion, but obviously it's not enough for Russia. Uh, but also in terms of territorial ambitions, where do you think is the current Russian red line in terms of all of those positions?
Okay, I think we should be based our assumptions on the public statement of President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov, and it's very clear that regarding territorial disputes, Russia wants, as of now, that Ukraine, US, and the international community legally should recognize Crimea and the entire Donetsk and Lugansk regions as legally part of Russia. And Ukrainian troops should withdraw from the 30-35% of Donetsk region, which they still control. That the front line should be frozen in the Kherson and Zaporozhye region as of now. And these regions will remain like semi-legal. Russia will continue to believe that part of Zaporozhye and Kherson are occupied by Ukraine, while Ukraine and international community will argue that part of Zaporozhye and Kherson are occupied by Russia. But again, Crimea, Donetsk and Lugansk regions should be legally recognized as part of Russia by everyone. This is first. Second, Ukraine should not have strong army. There should be limits on manpower. I heard the number of maximum 600,000. There should be limits on weaponry. This is second demand. Third, there should be no international or foreign troops on Ukraine. This is the third demand, no foreign troops. Fourth, there should be legally protected rights for Russian language and for Russian speaking for those who still will live in Ukraine. Fifth, there will be some laws protecting Russia-connected Ukraine Orthodox Church. This is a fifth. Legally, NATO should legally be claim, and it should be fixed legally, that there will be no expansion of NATO eastward. Forget about Ukraine, Georgia, or anyone else. This is a six. I think these are the major 6 points. And Russia just is telling that, okay, we may accept Ukraine entering European Union, knowing very well that Ukraine in the current conditions, given that even if Europe will recognize Crimea, Donetsk, and Lugansk as a part of Russia legally, but still, Europe will recognize part of Zaporozhye and Kherson as occupied by Russians. In this country, in these conditions, Ukraine will never join EU. So when Russians are telling, okay, we may accept Ukraine joining EU, they understand that in the current conditions and for the probably next 10, 15, 20 years at least, Ukraine is not going to join EU. So these are the Russian red lines as far as I understand. And again, what I'm saying is based on public statements of President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov.
Right. Okay. Well, from Ukraine, let's jump to closer to Armenia, but still, in our region. Netanyahu was in the White House last week, or this week still. Again, the main topic is to convince Trump to attack Iran. And it seems that Trump has agreed that Israel would have the US backing if Iran not only tries to restart its civilian nuclear program, but also in case Iran tries to start making ballistic missiles. Meanwhile, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian declared that Iran is essentially, and I'm quoting, in a full-scale war, and that was just from a couple of days ago. Obviously, these are very dire statements and dire positions expressed by leaders capable of destroying the world 10 times over. So I wanted to ask you, and everyone like we talked to also says that it's not if, but when this war will restart again. What is your outlook on Iran? And perhaps even talk about Armenia's role given this recent TRIPP agreement, and can Armenia stay out of it? How can Armenia navigate this potentially dangerous situation?
I think Israel's goal is very clear. Israel wants a very weak Iran or maybe dismembered Iran. So probably ideal scenario for Israel will be to transform Iran into some sort of another Syria. Let's put it this way. When there will be very weak central government, there will be semi-independent or semi-autonomous regions, like, I don't know, Belugis, probably Azeris, probably Kurds. And Israel failed to reach that goal in June 2025. And also, I think Israel failed to completely destroy, or at least it's not clear. Israel failed or Israel did not fail in its goal to completely destroy a nuclear program of Iran. The same is for the United States. So from Israeli perspective, I think Israel failed to reach its strategic goals. So I think it's quite natural to assume that Israel will think another military attack, hoping that this time it will be able to reach its strategic goals. From Iranian perspective, Iran in the last 6 months was actively fostering, fortifying its air defense. There were a lot of like semi-confirmed rumors about Iran buying air defense capacities from China and from Russia, like S-400 from Russia, and some S-300 Chinese equal of S-300 systems from China, no, S-400 from Russia, yes, and something equivalent to S-300 from China. So Iran also understands that Israel will do everything to weaken Iran, because if you look from Israeli perspective, all strong enemies of Israel, they are completely destroyed or are in a mess. I speak about Iraq, I speak about Syria, it's civil war, instability, and mess. Only Iran is there. Lebanon, Hezbollah, Hamas, all are more or less destroyed except Iran. So from this perspective, I think, unfortunately, it's quite logical to assume that Israel will try another war against Iran in 2026 to reach its strategic goals. And most probably, US at least will not stop Israel, or maybe even will join, like we saw in June 2025. Regarding Armenia, okay, Armenia is like a too compact country to be part of this equation. I think Armenia simply should have some scenarios for the worst case scenarios, like if there is a domestic instability of Iran, if we see the collapse of the state, or if we see the declaration of some semi-autonomous or autonomous republics or formation within Iranian territory, what does it mean for Armenia? Two like primary risks. First, if we are going to face hundreds of thousands ethnically Azeri people entering Sunik, what does it mean for Sunik, which population is only 130,000, I think, according to Armenian Statistical Committee? Then is Armenia able to stop them? Will Armenia be able to stop refugees, or Armenia will accept refugees? And then suddenly we will have a situation when in Sunik we have 130,000 Armenians and 250,000 other refugees. And what does it mean for all these Zangezur corridor trip and etc.? This is concern number one. And I think Armenian government should make a clear decision and also should cooperate with probably UNHCR, trying to filter these refugees according to best international standards. And second issue, we all know that 30% of Armenia's trade still goes via Iran and 70% from Georgia. And we just saw, like, I don't know, 0.1 point something percent trying to travel via Azerbaijan. So if there is instability in Iran and the 30% export import from overall Armenian export import is gone, how Armenia is going to cope it to prevent any economic crisis or even lack of some vital products in Armenia?
Okay, Benjamin, I'll bring us around to the continuing saga between Armenia and Azerbaijan. In a press conference earlier this week, Ceyhun Bayramov, Azerbaijan's foreign minister, appeared to hint at Azerbaijani preconditions for signing and ratifying the so-called peace agreement that Pashinyan is implementing for Aliyev. He said, and I'm going to quote, "In order to ensure the signing and ratification of the agreement, it is of particular importance to fully implement the obligation in the Constitution of Armenia to eliminate the territorial claims existing against Azerbaijan and to ensure unhindered communications under the TRIPP project." First of all, I thought it was very interesting that he said TRIPP project and not their usual Zangezur corridor. So that was a little bit of a change. Can you elaborate for us on these two preconditions, constitutional changes and unhindered access, and tell us a little bit maybe what are the differences between Armenia and Azerbaijan in interpreting unhindered?
And also, I should mention that this is the first time that we're hearing the Zangezur corridor or TRIPP, and I think it's worth mentioning that this is actually the same thing, to me at least, as explicitly listed as a precondition by Azerbaijan.
Okay, my understanding and position is very clear, and this is clear for the last few years, and we discussed it many times. I strongly believe that Azerbaijan has no intention to sign any peace agreement with Armenia, because Azerbaijan believes that it will gain nothing from this peace agreement, while it will gain something from not signing peace agreement. So I'm using not the preconditions, but pretext. This constitution issue was a pretext not to sign peace agreement, and now they add the second pretext that Armenia should fully implement the TRIPP, and it's not very clear what does it mean fully implement, or from Armenian perspective, Armenia may say I fully implement, Azerbaijan may say no. So this is a second pretext not to sign peace agreement. But the key strategic reason is that Azerbaijan does not believe that it will gain anything from signing the peace agreement, but it will lose something from signing peace agreement, and it will gain something from not signing peace agreement. Because if there is a no peace agreement, Azerbaijan always will keep this like threat of use of military force against Armenia. Because if there is a peace agreement, the threat is much higher. Of course, we all understand that peace agreement will not bring the possibility or threat of use of force to the 0%. Always threat will be here, but without peace agreement or with peace agreement, the threat of use of force and the reliability of this threat are two different things. Without peace agreement, Azerbaijan will have much more possibilities to threaten Armenia with use of force, and actually perhaps use of force when it deems it necessary or useful for Azerbaijan. So that's it. No intention from Azerbaijan to sign peace agreement. We had one pretext for last 1.5 years. Now we have two pretexts, and I believe I argued in 2024 and in early 2025 that there are no guarantees that Azerbaijan will not add additional pretexts, even if Armenia is ready to satisfy the demand for the first pretext. And Ceyhun Bayramov just did it in December 2025. He simply added the second pretext.
Yes, you did. You've mentioned that before, and it's been
Yeah.
you've been very consistent with that statement. Does TRIPP actually hinder North-South communications, Benjamin? Could it affect Iran, Eurasian Economic Union communications, instant traffic between India and the Black Sea, for example? And also, TRIPP becomes essentially a competitor to traffic through Georgia. So does it present any kind of a national security issue for Georgia?
Okay, I think first of all, we should wait and see what TRIPP is going to be.
Mm.
We also see very active Russian movement in the last few weeks, starting from high-level statement from MFA to Russian ambassador. The TRIPP cannot happen without Russia. So I think the key is not that TRIPP will hinder the Armenia-Iran transportation, but the key is what's going TRIPP to be, the modalities of the TRIPP, and who will have what sort of involvement in TRIPP. It will be only US, it will be only US, Armenia, Azerbaijan, it will be only US and Russia. So as far as there is no clear understanding of modalities of TRIPP, and no one has clear understanding, even this joint Armenian-American company has not established yet. which should be given the rights to develop this railroad or highway or whatever. So as far as there is an absolute lack of clarity about this US Armenian company, about its rights, and about potential Russian role, it's very difficult to argue or say, oh, TRIPP will hinder something or TRIPP will not hinder something. So I think we have to wait to see. But one thing is clear that after a few months of initial, like very like not clear messaging from Russia, in December 2025, we started to get very clear messages from Russia that TRIPP or these communications, the key, let's use the term communications because not to confuse TRIPP, Zangezur corridor, crossroad of peace, or whatever. We are getting clear messages from Russia that communication, which will connect Azerbaijan with Turkey via Armenia, cannot be happen without some sort of Russian involvement, or Russia will perceive these communications without Russia's involvement as a direct threat to Russian interests. And we all know what Russia is capable of doing in the post-Soviet space if Russia believes that its vital interests put on threat.
We have a lot of questions on that issue in just a moment. I just want to understand a little bit more about some of the dynamics that are going on here, because in his meeting with Netanyahu, Trump one more time took credit for stopping the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. That's what he said, by threatening to impose a 200% tariff on both sides. And according to Trump, both sides immediately fell in line.
And Asbed, he also lectured Netanyahu on how to properly pronounce Azerbaijan.
Not,
This time
not Azerbaijan.
He didn't say Azerbaijan, which is
and this time
it's an
I think he said
improvement,
Armenia, not Albania.
Yes.
This is a quite impressive improvement, I would say, for
I'd like
President
to
Trump.
know, was Trump's threat aimed at Armenia or Azerbaijan? Because first of all, US-Armenia trade is kind of trivial. It's not zero, but it's not at the level of national security threatening for Armenia if there's a tariff on it. And second, Armenia has been a complete blind sheep. It's in fact been pretty much managed from the United States for the last 5 years. So it's not like you
But
have to threaten
also,
Pashinyan.
is this narrative even real? Because I think even Azerbaijan doesn't have a high enough trade. So when Trump is out threatening China, and playing poker with rare
Yes.
earth metals and magnets and things like that, and nuclear war, I think that yeah, I don't know, like where in that totem pole
Was
Azerbaijan
Trump
is, but
basically talking to Aliyev, trying to get Aliyev to fall in line? Is that what was going on?
Okay, my understanding is very simple. I think Trump in his brain has simply talking points about what he did.
Hmm.
And these are talking points that, okay, I stop wars and I threaten everyone with tariffs. So these are only two talking points. So he confuses these both talking or combines these both talking points. And he thinks about the same for Armenia and Azerbaijan, that he stops the war, which it actually did not. We may say that he prevented the new large-scale aggression by Azerbaijan by having this TRIPP. And from Azerbaijani perspective, maybe because Azerbaijan thinks that he got what he wanted, but this is another discussion. But first, President Aliyev did not stop the Armenia-Azerbaijan war because last time when people were died on Armenia-Azerbaijan border was in February 2024, when President Trump was fighting in courts, as far as I remember. And B, definitely US could not threaten Azerbaijan and Armenia with tariffs because both Armenia and Azerbaijan are trading with the trade with US is very, very, very low. For example, Turkey can threaten Azerbaijan with tariffs. Russia can threaten, I don't know. Russia can threaten tariffs with against Armenia. Theoretically, EU can threaten. For example, Italy can threaten Italy because almost half of Azerbaijan exports goes to Italy, oil and gas. But what's the United States? So simply, I think President Trump is talking point. Every time when you speak about some conflict, say two things: I stop the war and I use tariffs. And he tells this also to show his base in the United States that look, tariffs are good thing. Tariff didn't bring inflation. Instead, tariff brings, I don't know, trillions of dollars of US budget. And now even Trump established this Trump account as every newborn baby starting from January 2026, which allegedly get 1,000 US dollars from Trump or Trump account or whatever. So again, Trump did not stop any Armenian-Azerbaijan war. We may say that the Trump or United States prevent the new Azerbaijani aggression against Armenia. A, and B, what happened in August 2025 has nothing to do with US threats on put tariffs on Armenia and Azerbaijan.
yeah. Benjamin, going back to what we talked about, which is the Zangezur corridor or TRIPP, or any, okay, whatever, communications. Azerbaijan has clear ideas about what it wants, and it has clear demands, and it has the upper hand. So I think it's important to consider what Azerbaijan thinks it wants to get or it needs to get in order for this peace to happen. And I think that this issue of unhindered is very important for Azerbaijan. So what do you think unhindered means for Azerbaijan? Is it, does it include weaponry? Does it include, military personnel and equipment? I recently watched an interview of the U.S. military attaché in Armenia talking about this, and it seems like all of this is up in the air. Armenia is still sort of, has not excluded at least the possibility of actually weaponry and military equipment crossing freely from Nakhichevan through Armenia to the rest of Azerbaijan and Central Asia without any monitoring.
First of all, this unhindered is very important for Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan put efforts to put this wording in November 2020 statement, which was signed by Armenia, Russia, and Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan took efforts to have the same wording in Washington Declaration, signed in August 2025. So from Azerbaijani perspective, nothing was changed. Still, it gets unhindered access. Simply, there should be some Russian involvement. Now there should be some US involvement. But Azerbaijan believes that it got unhindered access. Okay, what does it mean, unhindered access? As far as I understand, I think in 2022, 2023, and probably first half of 2024, unhindered access for Azerbaijan means they will travel via Sunik from Azerbaijan to Nakhichevan, the same way as, for example, we are traveling from Yerevan to Gyumri, or you are traveling from Los Angeles to San Diego. Like absolutely nothing. No one stops. You are just continuously driving. Starting from second part of 2024, Azerbaijan said that, okay, unhindered means that, yes, there should be checks, but there should be no human presence. So everything should be automated. So yes, Azerbaijani citizens, cars, cargo can be stopped, passports can be scanned, the goods can be checked via scanners, but there should be no human-to-human interaction. As President Aliyev said, Azerbaijanis should see no human Armenian faces. Azerbaijanis should see only some equipment, some scanning machines for passport scans, some scanners for scanning cargoes, trains, or cars. So for the last 1.5 years, unhindered access means that Azerbaijani citizens are reaching the checkpoint on Azerbaijan-Sunik border. Then there is no Armenians, there is no human. They simply entering into some buses. Their photos have been taken. Their passports are being scanned automatically by themselves, and then the gate open, and then they continue driving via Sunik, reach Nakhichevan, Sunik border, again checkpoint, again the car is stopped, but no human face, no human interactions.
But
this
this
is
is
what
for
Azerbaijan
people.
understands.
What about for cargo? And what kind of cargo?
For cargo. So if we think about cargo, which will transport by cars, this is the same for cargo, like
Or
cars
train.
also.
Yeah.
Or regarding the train, it's not very clear for me. Like some argue that even trains can be stopped, and trains, every wagon can pass through some sort of scanners to see what inside. But another important issue is that we all know that every country theoretically has a right not to allow certain citizens of certain country to enter. Yes, there is a list of like non grata persons, like list of persons who can threaten your national security. From Azerbaijani perspective, unhindered means not only there should be no face-to-face interaction, no human interaction, but also Armenia effectively will have no right, for example, to say that, okay, I don't want this concrete Azerbaijani citizen to travel via Armenia, so I will stop him entering to Sunik. From Azerbaijani perspective, this is not going to happen. So Armenia only will be informed that this Azerbaijani citizen with this name and surname just entered Sunik and then left Sunik, entered Nakhichevan. But even if Armenia believes that this guy is, for example, the criminal, or even there is a criminal prosecutions in Armenia against this guy, because, for example, this guy in 2022 killed Armenian captives during the battles or whatever, Armenia will be deprived from possibility not only to arrest this person who is trying to enter Armenia, but also will be deprived from possibility to prevent this person using Armenian territory. Armenia only will be informed that this person first entered Sunik, and B, after like 40 minutes, left Sunik. Regarding the cargo, there are some discussions that some scanners should be there, provided by Americans. So both cars, trucks, and even trains, like each of the trains will be entered. There will be like big hangars with scanners. So these scanners will scan even the cargo trains or trucks. But let's see. But again, unhindered means that no human interaction between Armenians and Azerbaijanis. Everything is done by automation. And B, Armenia has no right to prevent or ban any Azerbaijani citizen from using Sunik to travel from Azerbaijan to Nakhichevan and vice versa.
Okay, I have to mention this. I was not going to, but since you mentioned special people, I have to mention this because it clearly depicts the state that Armenians are in. Ramil Safarov, the ex-murderer who murdered an Armenian in his sleep, an Armenian military officer in his sleep in Hungary in 2004. Aliyev was able to convince Orban to release Safarov. We know that when he was released, he promoted him to the rank of the military rank of lieutenant colonel. And just recently, Aliyev explicitly, in the midst of all these negotiations, he promoted Safarov to the rank of colonel. And I believe his wife also works for an agency, an Azerbaijani agency, who was also recently promoted. I don't think these are coincidences. I think that this is a specific message that Aliyev is trying to send. So
he will be going through Sunik and taking selfies and
yeah,
publishing
so
it.
essentially, like Ramil Safarov can
Not
enter
can,
Armenia.
he will do this.
And from Azerbaijani perspective, what unhinders means, it means that yes, even this person, Armenia will not be able to ban the enter of this person to Sunik to travel from Azerbaijan to Nakhichevan and vice versa. And what Azerbaijanis are telling, and I think we discussed very briefly, that this non-human interaction should apply only for Azerbaijani citizens. If there will be foreign citizens who will travel from Azerbaijan to Nakhichevan via Sunik, then ordinary procedures can be implied.
Getting back to these preconditions, Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan mentioned this week that there remain some disagreements between Armenia and Azerbaijan. What are those disagreements? And I guess you already answered the second part of the question. Are they likely to become preconditions?
Okay, look, it's very difficult to answer that question actually, because for example, Armenia is telling, or Armenian government is telling, that we have disagreements. We don't believe that Armenian constitution, or specifically the Declaration of Independence in Armenian constitution preamble, is an obstacle for the signature of peace agreement. This is official Armenian government position. But simultaneously, we know that Armenian government is preparing new draft constitution, and Prime Minister multiple times stated that from his perception, Declaration of Independence, there should be no reference to the Declaration of Independence in the new constitution. So it's a little bit confusing. So Armenia is telling that I have disagreement with Azerbaijan, that reference to the Declaration of Independence is obstacle. I don't believe this is obstacle, but simultaneously Prime Minister is stating that reference to the Declaration of Independence should be removed because this Declaration of Independence is threat to Armenian statehood. So at the end of the day, if we are going to have new constitution or draft constitution, which will have no reference to the Declaration of Independence, then it means there is no disagreement, because effectively Armenian government will remove a reference to the Declaration of Independence, which Azerbaijan demands, but telling that this is not because Azerbaijan demands, this is because we think so. But at the end of the day, regardless the real motives, why Armenian government is going to remove the reference to the Declaration of Independence from the new constitution, actually, in reality, we will have the situation which will satisfy Azerbaijani demands. This is first. And regarding the second, this unhindered access, of course, we do not know the modalities. We do not know what US and Armenia are negotiating. But I believe several times high Armenian officials stated that, okay, theoretically, yes, we may have a situation when we do not need human-to-human interaction during border crossing, because there are these new technologies. Even there were like examples of how EU citizens are entering EU during passport controls, and I saw it many times in European airports. When European citizens are simply entering the buses, there is no persons there. They are automatically scanning their passport and entering to the Schengen zone. So my understanding is that I don't exclude that at the end of the day, Armenian government may say, okay, I am okay with this zero human interaction procedures, but I only hope that at least Armenian government will still demand that, okay, but I have to right to prevent some people to enter. So, okay, there will be no humans, no Armenians checking the passport, but if passport scan will be made, then simultaneously, at the same second, Armenian relevant agencies will got information and they will say that, okay, this guy is in our blacklist, so this guy should not enter the Sunik or should not be allowed to travel via Sunik to Nakhichevan. I hope at least that Armenian government, while maybe agreeing to zero human-to-human interface passport or customs check, at least will argue that Armenia should have the right to prevent some people from entering Armenia.
Yeah. Benyamin, you talked about the interests of Russia and Russia being more assertive in terms of its interests. Russian officials have pointed to the November 10, 2020 statement saying it's still valid, and point number 9 of that statement, which says that Russian border guards should control the communications. Over the last week, we have seen some counter demands by Armenia. Pashinyan said that Russia should fix the various east-west portions of the railway that that have been basically languishing since the Artsakh War, and he threatened that if Russia has a monopoly currently, or a concession for a monopoly on Armenian railways, and if Russia does not fix this, then Armenia will potentially reduce or take away some of the Russian monopoly and make these construction works by themselves. What can you tell us about this episode in this back and forth between Russia and Armenia, and specifically Russian and Armenian interests in unblocking these, in the modalities and how these negotiations are going in terms of the TRIPP?
Okay, first, regarding the communications via Sunik, which should connect Azerbaijan with Turkey via Nakhichevan, I think it's very clear that it's not only about Azerbaijan, it's first about Turkey, because it will create a very short link from Turkey to Azerbaijan. Currently, Turkey has access to Azerbaijan via Georgia railway, these Baku-Tbilisi cars, but it's hundreds of kilometers via Georgia. And of course, Turkey has access to Azerbaijan via Iran. But again, we are speaking about hundreds of kilometers. If Turkey will get this unhindered access to Azerbaijan, it will mean that it will be almost direct access, and only it will be 44 or 45 kilometers passing through another country. And especially if it will be unhindered, because let's be clear, there is no unhindered provisions while connecting Turkey with Azerbaijan via Georgia or Turkey with Azerbaijan via Iran. This is first. Second, Russia also understands that this also means, first of all, connection between Turkey and Azerbaijan and Turkey with Central Asia. And all this is part also of this organization of Turkic state, or let's create another united Turkic world, which will compete in this real or emerging or not emerging multipolar world order. So from Russia's perspective, Russian presence in the communications, which will connect in a very short way Turkey with Azerbaijan and Central Asia, are very important. So Russia will be aware that these communications are not going to be used against its vital interests. But again, both South Caucasus and Central Asia are part of Russian vital interest. It's not, and this is not the case, by the way, for the United States, which is 10,000 kilometers away from South Caucasus. And we see that how President Trump is telling, oh, Ukraine is not part of our vital interests, because Ukraine is 10,000 kilometers, it's Europe's issue. So if even Ukraine is not part of US vital interest, what to speak about South Caucasus? So regarding the demand of Pashinyan, like, okay, let's renovate the railroad connections from Armenia to Nakhichevan, from Armenia to Turkey, Gyumri cars, and from Armenia to Azerbaijan via Ijevan, Kazakh. Of course, if all these communications will be open, this will be good for Armenia, because Armenia will get railroad access to Iran via Nakhichevan, and Armenia will get railroad access via Turkey to Middle East, or at least to the Turkish Mediterranean ports. And then you can have access both to Middle East and to the European market also via Turkey. Russian interest, okay, theoretically, Russian interest could be, okay, let's have additional railroad access to Armenia via Azerbaijan, direct via Azerbaijan, because you know that currently we just saw the few shipments from Russia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Armenia. If this Ijevan-Kazakh railway is ready, then Russia may ship something to Armenia directly via Azerbaijan, and Armenia may export something to Russia directly via Azerbaijan, circumventing Georgia's route. And as I said, theoretically, if there will be both Armenia-Nakhchivan and Armenia-Gyumri Railroad open, then this will give second option for Russia to reach to Turkey via railroad, because currently Russia can reach via Russia, Azerbaijan, Georgia. And if everything is open, then it will be Russia, Azerbaijan, Syunik, Nakhchivan, Yerevan, Gyumri Kars. Again, Russia, Turkey. But again, first, I'm not sure that Azerbaijan will be happy to allow Armenia to use railroad via Nakhchivan to reach Iran. Most probably not. And I don't think that Turkey will fully open its border, including railroad connection with Armenia, as far as there is a no peace agreement with Azerbaijan. And because Azerbaijan will do everything never to have peace agreement with Armenia, I'm afraid that we will continue to be in this loop. When there is a no peace agreement with Azerbaijan, Armenia, and there is a no full border opening, including railroad access between Armenia and Turkey, and there is a no railroad access between Armenia and Iran via Nakhchivan. So the key, again, is the communications, which will connect Turkey with Central Asia. This is a big geopolitical game. And of course, Russia wants to be part of these communications, to have involvement, to prevent these communications between Turkey and Central Asia to be used against Russia. That's it.
Okay, Benjamin, before we go to our year-end review, I have one quick question here. Trump recently recalled 29 or 30 of the US ambassadors that were appointed during Biden's time. Among them is Christina Kvien in Armenia. Is this a cosmetic change by Trump, an ego-driven kind of a thing, or could there be more consequences and more than meets the eye in this change of ambassador in Armenia?
Okay, I'm not sure about the motives of this entire recalling of 30 ambassadors, but if we speak about the US ambassador in Armenia, let's not forget that she arrived in Armenia in February 2023. And usually American ambassadors stay in Armenia for 3 years. For example, John Heffern stayed 3 years, then Richard Mills stayed for 3 years, 2015, 2018. Then Lynn Tracy stayed 3 years, 2019, 2022. So effectively, in February 2026, the 3 years was going to expire. So most probably, current US ambassador was going to be replaced in any case in the next few months. So I'm not in a position we can call this recall, because if your term is for 3 years, which means February 2023, February 2026, and you are being recalled in mid or late January 2026, like 4 weeks before your official term may expire, I don't think this is a recall. I don't exclude that maybe among these 30 ambassadors, there are people who have been just appointed or who have been appointed 1 year ago or 2 years ago. For them, we can use the term recall. But for the US ambassador in Armenia, whose term was going to expire in February 2026, the recall in late January 2026, I don't think this is a real recall. So I'm not sure that this is a significant development.
Okay. Well, let's look at our 2025 predictions or assessments we made a year ago in episode 403. And for our listeners, you can go to podcast.groong.org/403 and check what those things were. But let me set the pace and start with my own predictions. I made a prediction that Ukraine was likely going to wind down and slow down, possibly entering negotiations, but not fully get resolved. I predicted for Gaza I expected continued catastrophe, potential ethnic cleansing, and broad international indifference. And for Armenia, I said, do not expect regime collapse. Anticipate continued Western financial aid via loans and sustaining the current government amid prolonged insecurity and stagnation. So if I were to rate myself, I think I got it right on Ukraine pretty much 100%. On Gaza, I think, well, it is an unmitigated disaster and genocide. Trump has basically succeeded to get it off the daily U.S. National headlines, but that doesn't mean that life has gotten better over there or anything like that. I think it's still a huge problem, international problem. And for Armenia, well, you see what we have already: religious persecutions, jailings, archbishops in jail, non-line CEOs, tycoons, opposition members. There are a lot of political prisoners in Armenia. And finally, the addition of another $1.5 billion, $1.5 billion of national debt with no end in sight and no reduction of poverty. And, I haven't been to Armenia, so I don't know what the infrastructure is like, but maybe you can tell me that. But, I'll just be complimentary to myself for once and say I got 3 out of 3. Hovik?
Yeah.
And you can
I
knock
mean,
me
it's
down, Hovik, if you want to say you're going to give me 2.5 points out of 3, and try
look,
to beat me as a 3
I
out
don't
of
think
3.
this is
That'll be okay.
I don't think this is a matter that we should gamify and say, how many points
Maybe 2.7.
you know when each of these like 0.1 percentage points would mean thousands of lives lost. But I think that we are all like, on the same page in terms of, our predictions,
Yeah.
so I think that both like Benjamin and I, predicted that there was going to be, or, worried that there was going to be a war against Iran, which happened. And it's going to continue into 2026. Um, I do have a bone to pick with your prediction on Ukraine. I mean, even though it's entering into negotiations, I would say that, at least according to what Benjamin said today, I think it's nowhere close to slowing down.
Mm.
And I think that, despite the pretense or despite the official facade of negotiations, I think the Ukraine war is still raging on. And maybe, and in terms of territorial gains, Russia is only accelerating its territorial gains and not slowing down. But
So 2.6, 2.7? Never mind.
2.5, 2.5,
Okay.
Yeah,
2.4.
2.4.
2.35. Okay. And unfortunately, yeah. So my thoughts on Ukraine, I believe, were also the same. The conflict would not end, and it would be displaced into other regions. We see the repercussions for Armenia because of the Russian preoccupation with Ukraine. And in terms of Armenia itself, I saw a year ago no positive trajectory without regime change. And given that regime change has not happened, there is nothing positive to talk about in Armenia, unfortunately, for me. I don't want to say I got 100% on my dire predictions, but that's what it looks like. Um,
Okay. Benjamin,
I think we should be fair to ourselves because look, we can go and read, for example, the best think tanks assessments like Council on Foreign Relations, CSIS, like IISS, Chatham House, or even European Council on Foreign Relations. And we are mostly speaking about Western think tanks because the concept of think tank is mostly valid in the West. And we are not very much familiar with like Indian, Chinese, or Global South think tanks. But even these people, they like, so if we believe that we were right from 3 to 2.5, I think we can argue that are very close to the high standard because even people sitting in CPR, CSIS, and these are top big names, people who have much more access to the information. Because, for example, in US, top level think tanks every week or once per 2 weeks, they have access to some sort of classified information, like Secretary of State are coming to speak with them, CIA director speaks with them in a closed door discussion. So even if these people fail to fully predict the reality, then speaking about us sitting in Yerevan in Los Angeles with zero access to any classified information, I think we have done quite good job, frankly speaking.
yeah, definitely, especially compared with uh, von der Leyen, who predicted that Russian economy is in tatters, and Kaya Kallas, who wanted Russia to be dismembered into 20 or so different states. I think that definitely our predictions are much better than
Yes.
these two individuals, who I think have some pretty important jobs. So
Yeah,
Benjamin,
they are the leaders of the EU.
talk about your predictions for 2025.
Okay, I think mostly again this was in line like the Ukraine that there is not going to be the peace there and there is no peace there. I think we also thought that there could be some sort of escalation against Armenia, and we definitely no one can predict that Trump will jump into this South Caucasus. We thought that Trump will be less interested in South Caucasus. So I think from my perspective, the key thing which we couldn't anticipate, knowing that President Trump won the November 2024 elections, is this U.S. active involvement in the South Caucasus and the U.S. efforts to bring this Washington Declaration and bring U.S. involvement into these communications, which will connect Azerbaijan, Turkey, or Turkey with Central Asia. Otherwise, I think predictions were more or less close to reality as far as is possible in this crazy geopolitical world.
I wanted to ask you quickly, from the time before Trump came on board, Did he meet your expectations as to about how involved he was going to be with the South Caucasus? Did you expect him to be a little, as much as he has, or more at the time, like a year
Frankly,
ago?
frankly speaking, I thought that definitely he will have less involvement than Biden administration, but we saw the same level. And at the end of the day, he even managed to bring Pashinyan and Aliyev to Washington and sign Washington Declaration and even initial peace agreement, which does not mean anything, frankly speaking, but still. So yes, I thought that it will be less involvement, but we see the same level in involvement and some higher results, at least photo optic results. Let's put it this way.
Okay. Well, let's move to our 2026 predictions because we're running out of time. Uh, give us, Benjamin, give us three predictions. Again, one that is highly likely to happen, one that you think, I'm not sure if it's going to happen or not, 50-50, and one that you think is in the works, but it's not likely to happen in 26.
Okay, let's start from 2026, which is not likely to happen, is any peace agreement signed between Armenia and Azerbaijan, as simple as it is. What is highly likely, I'm afraid, some sort of military escalation against Iran. Again, I don't know. This will be like one day surgical strikes or large scale war. I'm not sure, but some sort of military escalation is highly likely. And in Ukraine, probably I would say that continuing of hostilities and incremental gains by Russia, additional thousands and thousands of square kilometers fell under Russian control, but still Ukraine is not fully break up. I mean, is not in the point when Ukraine will be forced to accept Russian demand, which again Ukraine believe it will be capitulation. So no peace agreement, most likely some sort of military action against Iran, and grinding war in Ukraine with additional Russian territorial gains probably.
Okay. Hovik, do you have three events that you think are likely?
I don't want to agree with Benjamin about everything he mentioned internationally, so I will just, but I will say that I do agree with everything he said. So I will focus on Armenia. I think that what is unfortunately very likely to happen is that Pashinyan will win. I mean that in air quotes, parliamentary elections in 2026. He will do so under a lot of pressure, using administrative resources, using outright falsifications, and with the support and cheering of everyone in the West, including the United States. Um, there is the European political community that is scheduled to take place right before the elections. J.D. Vance is reported to be considering visiting Armenia right before the elections. EU is going to uh, help Armenia, and I don't mean with the 15 million that it promised. That's nothing, but I think what that 15 million means is that it will be a commitment to look the other way in case Pashinyan does something. And what could Pashinyan do? Well, he's obviously going to, just like in Moldova, he's going to ban opposition parties. He's going to do everything to jail and intimidate the opposition, and he will do so in a surgical way that targeting the most important opponents first.
Were you surprised that Samvel Karabedyan was actually released to home detention?
I was not surprised because it was ridiculous. It was a ridiculous charge to begin with, and everyone is like, cheering this, saying it's a good. I mean, he's still under
He's been in
arrest. He's
jail
still
for
under.
6 months for no reason, essentially.
Yeah. So I don't see like what is there to
Hmm.
celebrate about. I think he should be completely free. I think that, but nevertheless, all this negative aside, I think that evil cannot prevail over good. So I think that even if Pashinyan, quote unquote, wins the elections, it will turn into, unfortunately, a conflict in the streets of Yerevan. That I think that it would be best to avoid that situation. So,
Did you give us
in
your medium and low likelihood events?
medium likelihood is that Pashinyan um, will decide to call it quits. I just don't see a good end for him if he continues. So And low likelihood is Pashinyan prevailing over the Armenian church, because I think Satan cannot win over God. So that's my prediction.
My God, Hovik, Pashinyan, Pashinyan, and Pashinyan for 1, 2, and 3. Okay, well,
Yes.
I hate to say that I took the easy way out, and for my high likelihood, I also said that we're going to see Iran-Israel Part 2, unfortunately. That's not much of a prediction, given all the conversations we've had this year. And a year from now, we're going to be talking about the same thing, absolutely, that goals were not achieved, strategic goals were not achieved, and there will be an Iran-Israel Part 3 in 2027. For my 50-50, here's where I go a little bit on a limb, because I want to be daring and see if we can push the envelope a little bit. For my 50-50, I said there might be a formal withdrawal from the CSTO. I'm not sure what we would replace the CSTO with, but I feel like with Pashinyan experimenting with these oil and gas and grain shipments through Azerbaijan, from Azerbaijan and everything, he might try to replace a lot of the Russian dependency and suddenly switch all of the sourcing to, let's say, Azerbaijani oil and gas instead of Russian, and just decide that he's leaving the CSTO. And then there could be consequences. Consequences like Russia suddenly says, I mean, he could also say, Russia, take 5 years and get out of the 102nd base in Gyumri. And I thought there could be consequences to this, like Russia could just annex the base and say that is Russian territory. And we can go from there as to what kind of scenarios would abound. But that becomes, as Benjamin used to say frequently, science fiction. And for my low likelihood prediction is kind of like your high likelihood, Hovik. Pashinyan losing the parliamentary elections in June 2026. Very low likelihood, because I think that there will be so much falsification and administrative resources and jailings and whatever's that I don't see it happening. And there could be consequences to him losing the elections. Like Azerbaijan could attack, could annex Sunik to prevent some kind of a government that he doesn't approve of coming and stopping the negotiations, and everything starts from ground zero. So that's what I think. And we'll put it in the show notes at podcast.groong.org. And this episode is going to be 500. And next year we'll reference and we'll see how things are going.
I'm afraid not a very optimistic assessment, but still because this is a December 31 in Armenia and evening December 30
Almost
in
for
Los
me also.
Angeles. Yes, almost for you. I think few minutes and you jump into December 31, and we will jump into 2026 within, I guess, 12 hours more or less, or even less. So despite the predictions are not too optimistic, still, okay, as a Christians, we should have hope. So let's hope that not all our negative predictions will come true. And hope is very important sometimes. And also wish everyone, including, first of all, Asbed and Hovik, to you, but also to all our listeners and all our Armenian nation all over the world, as happy as possible in the new 2026 year, and Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Shunravur Amanor. We say New Year, we call Amanor in Armenian. So Happy New Year. And happy coming Christmas. Armenians celebrate Christmas on January 6th. We will have another show before that. So let's focus one step at a time. Happy New Year, and we'll talk to you in 2026.
Happy New Year. In Armenian, Shnoravor Nordari Yevsutsunund, everyone. We'll talk to you in 2026. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.